the long anticipated and highly memed comic book property, Madam Web. This is a Spider-Man adjacent property, is a character from the 80s that kind of is a clairvoyant and has a team of spider people that she works with. This film adaptation is a little bit different. It stars Dakota Johnson as Cassandra Cassie Webb. She is a paramedic living in New York. She's a very cynical person. She doesn't really have family or friends. She's kind of dark to be around, a little bit of a downer. One day, when she's out of work, she is involved in an accident and is thrown into the river, nearly drowns, is brought back to the life by one Ben Parker. Yes, Uncle Ben from the Spider-Man universe, played by Adam Scott. And after this accident, after she kind of dies and comes back, is revived, things are different. Things aren't quite the same. And she starts to relive moments in her life, and she realizes that she's seeing the future, but only a little bit, and only a little bit at a time. She might see 5 minutes into the future, and she tries to kind of change some things and isn't really able to make much difference, but that starts to improve. One day when she walks on the train, she first sees a bad agent killing four girls on the train, and she's able to not stop him, but able to get these girls off the train, and has to help them, has to learn to control these new powers that she has, and kind of uncover the secret of her family and where the spider powers come from, while also playing you know babysitter to these four potential spider people, one of which is of course Sydney Sweeney, who's larger than life right now. So that's our setup. It's really complicated, a lot going on. We got a lot to talk about with this movie. Zach, what do you think of Madame Web?
I would love to get on here and just say right on the top that Madam Web is a so bad it's good feature. I really would, but I am not a big purveyor of so bad it's good cinema. And I'm gonna be honest, man, I struggled with this movie. Like, there's bits I think that are so bad it's good, but overall I think it's just so bad it's bad. There is nothing redeemable in the way of this being a good fun feature. In my opinion, it is bad all over. The only redeeming quality is if it goes so far over the top to be bad that you throw it on during like a party with your friends, a kickback as it were, and you hang out and have fun and you laugh at all the goofy stuff. But let me remind you, for those of you who believe you are cynical enough, strong enough, wise enough to laugh at the ironic here, to jeer at the things that do not work, let me remind you, this is a 2-hour feature, and it is a slog in its most boring moments to get through. They try to edit around it. They try to hit you with jump scares and goofy things to make it exciting. It doesn't work. Abandon all hope, ye who enter Madam Web. It is bad from start to finish, and I'm so looking forward to talking about it because I want to talk about the movie, and then we're going to talk about how this happened and why Sony made this way. And it's just going to be a nuanced conversation I'm excited to have. So Andy, where do we get started? Do we start with performances, tone, story, general direction? I mean, what the hell happened here?
So I will first off come out and I agree. It is kind of a disaster in a lot of ways. I still had a lot of fun and I laughed through it. It's definitely has lots of so bad it's good moment. Some of it is. I mean, it's like two of these in a row because we watched Argyle. I would say this is better than Argyle, or at least more enjoyable than Argyle. Like, I would rewatch Madam Web even as a joke. I would never put anyone through Argyle. It's got lots of problems, from writing to acting to effects to just kind of the whole concept. But at the same time, there's parts where they clearly spent the money. Like, there's some like big stunts and like what is a lot of CGI. But but somehow it's an expensive steaming pile. So Zach, why don't we start with the story, the plot? That seems to be one of the biggest issues with it.
Yeah, well, I think part of the issue is kind of this overarching idea that we're going to keep making Spider-Man adjacent movies without Spider-Man in it. We're going to talk a bit more about Sony and Marvel's relationship and why that is in just a few minutes. But before we get there, Sony is just continuing to churn out these films that are in the Spider-Verse or Spider-Man adjacent, but don't have Spider-Man in them. They have imagery. They've got Venom, right? And Morbius is one of these entries. And now Madam Web is here. And then soon to follow this is Kraven the Hunter, starring Aaron Taylor Johnson. All of these movies are starting to follow a very similar format, which is you have your average protagonist, we'll say, because they're not necessarily heroes in all cases, but you have your average protagonist. They live in the city. Something happens to them and their life changes. They have a brief second act with some goofy action. And then in the third act, they kind of acquire some kind of responsibility of power and then resolve to not fight Spider-Man. But that's probably where it's headed because we're all adults and have to buy our movie tickets and go into the theater, and we understand what this is, right? And like this being kind of the third pass at this now, if you consider Venom 2, like it's particularly rote. Not to mention this is coming in the back end of dozens of comic book features that are all starting to feel very samey. So you got a movie that does not feel like anything new and does not feel like anything different. And tragically, it doesn't really do anything interesting with its cast either, which should be good. On IMDb, this cast reads great. Dakota Johnson was excellent in Suspiria. Sydney Sweeney is one of the hottest up-and-comers around. Nobody is talking about their performances in these features. Like, they're not great. And those are just the ones that are notable, right? Adam Scott's a lot of fun. There's a couple of the cast of girls in here that would be interesting, but they don't do a whole lot. I don't know.
So that is one of the big criticisms is the marketing has all these things about Madam Web, and then like the other women who are kind of like these Spider Girls. This is Sydney Sweeney's character, or Isabella Merced and Celeste O'Connor, who she ends up kind of having to babysit. Like she rescues them from getting killed on the train, and then she just kind of has to deal with them. But they're just teenagers, and like they're not actually in spoilers. They never get in the suits the entire movie. It's kind of flashbacks or flash forwards, or visions rather. So like our three Spider Women that we see in all the marketing, nowhere actually on screen. And like they don't have powers. They're just kind of annoying teenagers. They do kind of like, just work together, discover the power of family and friendship to overcome all obstacles, that whole sort of thing. I did think that the overall picture of this is good. Like the ideas, like if you were to write an outline of what's going on, it's some strong ideas, but the execution is so terrible.
Yeah.
Particularly a lot of stuff in Peru.
There's this really funny mechanic that the movie does. These like kind of flash forward dream sequence things that Madam Web starts experiencing after this particular harrowing incident towards the end of the first act. She starts to have these like flashes of like an alternate timeline, an alternate reality, the future, maybe the past, right? Where she can see ahead kind of, but she can't really control it. And these sequences are so choppily edited, like, and so loud, and often kicked off with some kind of jump scare, like just a gunshot in the middle of a scene. They just happen when the movie gets boring. Like as soon as things start to slow down a little bit, bang, and we're in the middle of like the flashiest, loudest sequence you've ever seen in a theater for no good reason. And it really does remind me of like Orson Welles putting a parrot in Citizen Kane, not with any kind of flair, just to like wake people up and be like, oh God, the movie got boring. Here's where test audiences said the movie got boring. We better edit it in a sequence here and make this exciting. A lot of this feels like it was pulled together by test audience screenings. Like, well, we showed this to a bunch of people in Arizona and they hated it. What could we do? They said the third act was slow. Let's tighten this up. It ends up feeling like a movie made by committee. It feels like a movie made by AI. And I know Dakota Johnson made that comment on SNL, a movie AI would make for your boyfriend to watch or something like that. She's been running entire smear campaign on this film.
Anti-PR campaign.
Yes, ever since she dumped her talent agency the week after the trailer dropped, and since has been doing everything she can to functionally distance herself creatively. It's really odd. Like it seems like the stars know it's bad. It seems like Sony knows it's bad. Everybody knows it's bad, but they also spent $80 million on it, which by the way, Variety was reporting that's closer to $100 million, but we're not sure. That's before marketing. So they got to get their money back, right? They got to do something with it. Here we are. We're just going to kind of just drop this in theaters in February and hope for the best.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of where to go. So some of the action is really good. Like actually some of the practical effects. Like there's a lot of car crashes in this. Those are some good. Like there's some stunt driving going on. That's you can see where the money went. And then there's some absolutely atrocious CGI and animation. Some stuff. I mean, a little bit like last week's Argyle, where I couldn't believe what I was seeing on screen was so bad, like both in concept and execution. And there's some of
Yeah.
that here as well, where you're seeing. I mean, just some of the action looks really bad, but a lot of like the more superhero looking stuff looks terrible. One of Madam Web's powers in the comic books is that she can kind of astral project, and you're like, they're not going to do that. That would be dumb. Well, they kind of do, and it looks as terrible as you might think, and it's as ineffective and like it's supposed to be kind of the climactic part, and it's like the opposite. You get the opposite effect. So a lot of the effects look really bad, but half of it looks fine. Looks pretty good. So it's bizarre how the money was spent.
Yeah, one of my favorite techniques this film uses a lot of, particularly in and out of scene transitions or in action, is rolling the camera. And not like just rolling film through the camera, like physically rolling the camera 360 degrees. It happens a lot. Director S.J. Clarkson seems to love this move. And while there's a lot going on with this film, I do want to mention Director Clarkson. Seems to have done a lot of TV, which some of it's bad, but also some of it's good. They directed an episode of Succession, HBO show, which I love. Like, seems to be a little hit and miss. And I understand you've got to make a movie inside the studio system. You've got to make a comic book film that satisfies Sony and Marvel. And again, test audiences. I have no doubt that's not an easy job, but it just feels like there was a lot that went wrong. The audio is particularly clumsy, notably with our antagonist, Tahir Rahim, who I swear to God, 90% of their lines are ADR'd. I don't know why. I don't know why. It is the most baffling thing on watch. Like, I had heard it, and then I went and saw the film and couldn't believe they almost never speak on screen, and when they do, it's ADR'd. It is the oddest thing. They've got a weird accent. Sydney Sweeney is supposed to be a teenager. She very much doesn't look like one. Dakota Johnson, for what it's worth, by the way, one more thing, I do want to say, she does take a swing at some lines creatively. I think a few of them do, because they probably realize just how bad this was. So there are some good line reads, and those are going to be the things you laugh at, right? Those are the things you laugh at, ironically, because it's funny that it's this bad. But the stuff you won't laugh at is the genuine boring bits, which I think are a lot of what's happening here. I think it's more than like the good. It's more than the so bad it's good. And that's ultimately like where I end up on it. But boy, I sure have seen a lot of people saying this might be a new cult classic, right? This might be a new hang out, watch with your friends film. What do you think, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, I saw it with a pretty full theater. People seem to be enjoying it. There's a lot of things that are funny, both intentionally and unintentionally. One thing I wanted to point out is this takes place in 2003, and the reason it does is that it's a little bit of a prequel to the Spider-Man universe, and the idea was that this was going to line up with Tom Holland's Spider-Man, maybe Spider-Man 4, and so they need all these characters to be like. That's why Sydney Sweeney is supposed to be like a young teenager, so that she can play like adult Sydney Sweeney in like whatever this Spider-Man thing is. So that's because it was originally going to take place in the 90s. So, but then that would have it lining up with the Andrew Garfield Amazing Spider-Man movies from the 2010s. So they bumped it up to the next decade. That's probably not going to happen at this rate. So again, it's kind of a victim of the studio system where a bunch of suits and bean counters and execs are like, all right, we got to have an explosion here. This has got to happen here. This has got to tie up. This has got to kick off 10 new films. And it's just executive to death. And we kind of get this huge mishmash.
Well, I really want to talk about Sony and Marvel's relationship and our Death of Cinema segment here in just a moment. So before we get there, I've got to know, Andy, to wrap up our Madam Web discussion, would you recommend Madam Web?
I would recommend it to fans of Spider-Man comic book movies. If you're really big into those, I think you'll still enjoy it. It's got it follows a lot of the same beats. It has some good moments. It has a lot of cringe and embarrassing and funny moments. It does kind of get into that so bad it's good. If you're curious, maybe save it for streaming. If all of this sounds horrific to you, I would say probably pass.
I am kind of not in the so bad it's good camp over here. I think I'm just going to say pass all around. I think there are people out there who really do like what's happening here. They see this as like art irony, and they really get a kick out of it. But I think if you're going to get maximum value, you have to be a really particular sort of cynic. And those people are out there, like, for sure. I know we have people who listen to this show who love this kind of stuff. And if you really like it, I'd say go in, you're going to have a good time. Otherwise, like, dude, there's so much better cinema out there. There's so many better ways to spend 2 hours than in Madam Web. Because in those moments when you're not laughing, in those moments when you're watching and thinking, this is really bad. People weren't kidding. Like, it is, man. It's real bad. And I'm looking forward to talking about how this happened and if Sony's going to recoup their losses and if there's any way this thing makes its money back in our Death of Cinema segment. So, Andy, would you mind bringing us in, please?
It's time for the Death of Cinema.